All right, one of the biggest stories of round one in the draft, it is Tennessee Titans. They're trading A.J. Brown to the Philadelphia Eagles in exchange for pick 18. And then 101, the Titans turn around and draft A.J. Brown's replacement, wide receiver Treylon Burks from Arkansas. A.J. Brown immediately signs the long-term deal with the Philadelphia Eagles. Let's start from the Eagles' perspective. They've been sitting here for multiple years, accumulating draft picks. We saw them move up earlier for Jordan Davis. Now they make a power move for A.J. Brown, true number one wide receiver.
Yeah, wide receiver was one of the picks that was possible for Philadelphia in this first round. They were a team that was talked about for a first-round wide receiver at times. They've essentially taken a first-round wide receiver and it's cost them a contract, right? That's the difference. They've given a first-round pick for A.J. Brown, and they've had to stump up the contract that apparently Tennessee didn't want to pay him. For the Philadelphia Eagles, I think it's a no-brainer, right? They have a cheap receiving core right now because the picks they've made have either they're all still on their first contracts. They've got mixed results in terms of panning out so far, so they don't have a lot of money invested in that group. They just have a lot of draft capital invested in it. And rather than invest yet more and potentially swing and miss again, they've just paid for the guarantee of getting a guy as good as A.J. Brown. They now get to pair A.J. Brown up with Devontae Smith, who fantastic route running day one. Good hands, great sideline ability. The one question mark is, does he have the physicality to really win as a true number one alpha receiver? And it's difficult to know because Jalen Hurts, didn't necessarily give him the opportunities to do that. But all of a sudden, he now gets to be number two while A.J. Brown is the alpha there. And that is just, I think, great for that receiving group across the board. But it does raise questions from a Tennessee point of view because you're trying to replicate what the Vikings did, right? You're trading away an elite receiver and you're immediately replacing him with what you got back to trade him away. And if you hit it, it's great because you got cheaper. But there's a risk attached to that.
I don't want to sound contradictory here because if you hear my Ravens analysis on the Marquise Brown trade, I'm going to tell you that the Ravens made out by drafting Marquise Brown, getting 3 years out of him, and then trading him for an equivalent first-round pick. Long term, that's a huge win. The difference is Marquise Brown's not A.J. Brown.
Yes.
Right? That is the difference, right? And so, to me, just like when you get the elite quarterback, you lock him up. And that's the guy. We are finding that the elite receiver, even though a lot of smart teams, the good teams are trading their guys away this offseason, the elite receiver is a force multiplier for the offense. And say what you want about Ryan Tannehill, and he turned his career around when he went to Tennessee. And you might want to put, is it because it's Tennessee? Is it the new scheme? Was it Derrick Henry? Or was it simply A.J. Brown? How many times did A.J. Brown turn a 13-yard out into like an 80-yard touchdown? I mean, just change the game. That's what the Eagles are getting. They're paying for it.
Yeah.
But I think that's worth it in today's NFL. That's what you're seeing across the league right now.
Look, at some point, you're going to have to pay players to become really good. You can't just assemble a roster of elite rookie contract players. Nobody is good enough at drafting to get away with doing that. You can't achieve that. So there's no point in drafting players like A.J. Brown, hitting on an A.J. Brown, right? A guy who you got lowered, not in the first round, turns into a superstar, and then at some point his second contract is due. Pay the man. He's earned it, and he's worth that money. And they didn't have to go as far as the DeAndre Hopkins deal, as the Tyreek. He's getting paid 4-year extension, $100 million, $57 million guaranteed. So let's call it $25 million a year. That seems fair.
I would pay that. I would pay that for A.J. Brown.
That's what I'm saying.
We've talked about Debo maybe being below that at
right.
the 20, 21 mark, but I would pay that 25 for A.J. Brown. I love this for the Eagles.
That's what I'm saying. He's worth that money. Now, Philadelphia can definitely pay it, right? Because they have all those guys on rookie contracts. They're good. They don't have the investment at that position. Tennessee, maybe it's more of a squeeze, but at some point, that's the guy that earned that contract, right? If you're not going to pay A.J. Brown that contract, who are you going to pay money to? It's just, at some point, that's the guy, that's the point in the draft.
Well, the Titans are paying the money to Ryan Tannehill, second contract guy, right? They're paying the money to Derrick Henry.
But you got to do
a little bit, right?
But, the debate is how many players you can give that kind of contract to. And whatever that number is, A.J. Brown is in that group. If he's the guy that should be getting that kind of money. So
the Titans, look, all the money that the Titans are paying to Bud Dupree and Harold Landry.
Right.
So all I'm saying from a team building standpoint and what wins in today's NFL, I would want that money in A.J. Brown's pocket on my team and then draft the next edge that can be comparable to Bud Dupree or Harold Landry off the edge. Draft the guy in the first round at 26. There's probably a guy that's in that range that could give you that type of production.
Now you trade him away, and the problem with that is you immediately have to replace him with that pick, essentially. Now, look, it's worked before. The Vikings did it. They're the classic example of a team that managed to pull off this trick. I would argue, though, that is an extremely unlikely occurrence and such a small window to be hitting. The Vikings trade away Stephon Diggs. They get Justin Jefferson. By almost every conceivable measure, that's basically a wash, right? It's a sidestep, but you got a lot cheaper. You didn't have to pay Stephon Diggs his contract. You got a guy on a rookie deal instead. Now, the Vikings, you go back a little bit further into the ether, they're also a team of how that shows you how it can go spectacularly wrong. The Vikings trade away Randy Moss and replace him with the same draft pick, and they get Troy Williamson, right? So, look, Treylon Burks, he's a guy with a wide spectrum of possible outcomes.
For sure.
Did not play conventional wide receiver at college, right? Was basically a gadget player at Arkansas. And that's not necessarily a knock on Burks. He was a great receiver for that role. They just got the ball in his hands however they could do it. They line him up in the slot. They line him up at tight end. They line him up in the backfield, whatever. Get Treylon Burks the ball, let him do good things. But all of a sudden, he now has to step in and not just be a gimmick player in an offense. He has to do A.J. Brown. And that's not easy.
With Robert Woods on the other side, again, both, Woods is a high end too. He's a high end number 2. Look, you're right about Burks. Different style. I like him a lot as a player. It is a lot of pressure. But I don't think it's just that. We pound the table for you win on the outside and you win with receivers in today's NFL. The Titans are in a different situation. They can win with Derrick Henry, right? They have games where Derrick Henry absolutely takes over. But I don't, remember I used to always say, I don't want to see Patrick Mahomes without Tyreek Hill. I just don't want to explore that world. I don't know if I want to explore the Ryan Tannehill world without A.J. Brown because we've seen it before. But and I just don't know if that has been the catalyst for Ryan Tannehill's turnaround.
And by the way, if the Robert Woods trade has squeezed your cap to the point where you can't give A.J. Brown that second contract, I don't think that was worth it. Like, I think you would be better off not trading for Robert Woods, paying A.J. Brown his money, and then still drafting Treylon Burks. You know what I mean? Like, that doesn't make sense to me.
Let me just add some perspective from the Titans' point of view. I want to circle back to the Eagles too, but the guys that are making over $10 million APY for the Titans, Tannehill's close to 30, Robert Woods at 16, Taylor Lewan at tackle at 16, Derrick Henry 12.5, Harold Landry on defense 17.5, Bud Dupree 16, Kevin Byard 14, Zach Cunningham, the linebacker, at 11. So then it's like, hey, is A.J. Brown worth Zach Cunningham and Harold Landry or whatever it is per year? And at that position, with how good he's been early in his career, it might be the case. So I think it's a lot of pressure on Treylon Burks, who we like as a player. We like him, but I think there's a lot of pressure there. And the Titans remain a run-first team. For the Eagles, Jalen Hurts finishes his first contract here. I like Jalen Hurts as a first contract quarterback, and they're playing this the way the Chargers are and some of these other teams, right? Being aggressive and taking advantage of that extra cap space.
And another team who, all these teams with multiple first-round picks seem to be coming out really well. Like, the Eagles have parlayed their 2 first-rounders into Jordan Davis and A.J. Brown.
That's the thing, too. I think that's part of the strategy, why we like trading down so much and accumulating picks. Sometimes you use the picks. Other times, you trade the pick for an A.J. Brown. So I'm loving this for the Eagles. I just think it's a little risky for the Tennessee Titans.
Big time.